And hello again, my friends. I thought it was time to find some more creepy crawlies to regale you all with, and my next thought was, now where could we possibly find critters scary enough to... And before I even finished that thought, my psyche was saying, Australia, duh. And so here we are. A few cryptids and one really disturbing legend or phenomena later, and I was sold. In Japan, we encountered ghosts with opinions and a few boundary issues. In Appalachia, or Appalachia, so you all don't complain about how I said it, we wandered through some of the haunting oral traditions of the Cherokee. And there's no reason to think that Australia would ever be any less terrifying. And just to prove my point, we're going to start off with one of Australia's heaviest hitters. So, strap in, throw some prawn on the barbie. I'm so sorry. And let's go to the land down under and just look at some legends. Enjoy. Legend 1, the Yowie. Also known as the hairy problem child of Australia, according to Tom. Now, I know the threshold of that subtitle is vast, but I also think that the Yowie is kind of head and shoulders above the competition, as well as head and shoulders above most full-grown men, but I digress. Now, you could be forgiven for hearing the word Yowie and immediately going, oh, Aussie's Bigfoot, cute. Because, as with any truly good story, it's just so much more deliciously complex than all that. And for those that heard the word Yowie and had no idea what I was talking about, welcome to the show. If you're not familiar with the bizarre beings known as cryptids, this might be a long one for you. Now, the context builders among you have probably gathered that the Yowie is comparable to the American Bigfoot. It's a tall, hairy, ape-like critter that tends to call the Blue Mountains and the Great Dividing Range home. Now, this particular legend is the folklore equivalent to a land bridge between the Aboriginal culture and post-colonial culture. I mean, you want to get someone's attention and get them to engage with you, just start telling the story about the giant, hairy wild man and people will start to listen. Trust me on that, and just don't think too much about it. So, proximity plus communication equals cultural exchange. This is also the moment to acknowledge that right out the gate with the description of the so-called Yowie, we have our first drops of diffusion sprinkling into the narrative. It goes without saying that the First Nation peoples are not some vast and unified culture the way Rome or even the early Greek city-states were. While their culture was vast, each people had their own insular subculture, and this can be reflected in the differing descriptions of the Yowie. While most agree that the Yowie is tall with hair covering its body, usually reddish or brown fur, some traditions have the Yowie with a more man-like face and human features. Other tribal traditions emphasize that the face is flatter and more ape-like. Even the height can vary, anywhere from 5 feet to 9. Of course, all descriptions have to include the massive feet because, well, branding. Am I right? Some of the oldest tales of the Yowie do mention a detail that, whether by design or not, really kind of sets the Yowie apart in the entire giant ape-man genre of stories. They mention a red mouth and fang-like canines. Because, of course, a 9-foot-tall towering ape-man needs to be more terrifying. Now, long before the convicts and colonists arrived in the outback, the First Nations had their stories about the hairy wild men. They had their own names and cultural projections on their version of what we would come to call the Yowie. For anyone to say, this is exactly what the Yowie is with any kind of certainty, is really undermining the true complexity of the entire story. So, alongside the creatures such as Sasquatch, the Ohio Grassman, or the Tennessee Wildman, the Yowie is just one of those wonderfully mysterious figures that will always mean different things to different people. So, I've laid out a bit of pre-colonial context. Now let's have a look at the earliest recorded Victorian encounter with the Yowie. It was on Phillips Island in 1849, when people first started talking about sighting a strange hairy figure lounging by a lake. And of course, when left at just that, it could easily be put down to colonial panic, with a multitude of other things. But then you hear that this creature was half baboon and half man. That really makes you at least stop to think about it. And then you hear that it's unlike anything else native to the island. And that brings in that creeping kind of fear of a rogue, unknown factor in the wilds. And this sighting would be the first strand that would begin braiding together the pre-colonial First Nation stories and the post-colonial culture going forward. The Aborigines had their old folktales about the hairy wild men, and now here were the colonists, pen and paper in hand, saying, "Hey, so we saw some really weird stuff out here, so, have you ever..." And all the proof that the Yowie is a damn good story, if nothing else, comes from the fact that modern stories and sightings of the Yowie haven't changed all that much. The height, the hair color, the red mouth, it's all still there. And there have been more sightings as recently as a story from the Sunshine Coast in 2021. 3 mates that were driving along and they spotted a figure hunched under a streetlight. The figure just sat there like it was annoyed by the unexpected company. They crept closer and they all noted the same details. Red-brown hair, long arms, ape-like features, and a gait that was unlike anything they had ever seen. One of my personal favorites, that's Tom's favorite, comes from 1977. And yes, this is going to be a testament to how much of a nerd he is. When a Queensland senator, yes, an elected official and alleged grown-ass man with better things to do, described seeing a creature that was over 3 meters tall. The official in question equated the creature to Chewbacca of then Episode 4 fame. Now, whether the man actually saw the Yowie or not, when someone that has that much to lose tells a story about a 9-foot-tall Australian Wookiee, just for the sake of the story, maybe, we should at least stop to listen to the story about this hairy, wild man. Legend 2, the Bunyip, or the water-dwelling shapeshifter. It's now time to leave the Yowie in their mountain forests and travel into the equally enigmatic and possibly even more dangerous waters of Australia. Swamps, creeks, rivers, lakes. Because in Australia, where everything is trying to kill you, the water is no exception. Because of course it's not. And again, this is one of those beautiful little land bridges back to the culture of the Aboriginal people. I give you the Bunyip. This delightful little, let's call it a spirit, is definitely less a physical being, but still very much a tangible kind of dread. The first delightful little clue that it's a spirit is the fact that absolutely none of the various Aboriginal descriptions are the same. In some descriptions, it is seen as a massive serpentine creature. In others, it has tusks, fur, even feathers, or a dog-like face. And even the post-colonial stories carry on that same kind of spirit, no pun intended. It looks like a seal, but is way too big. It looks like a calf, but it's way too wet. It's some kind of demonic water spirit with glowing eyes. And since the story started with the Aboriginal people, then that's where we should really start looking if we want to understand this creature, and just what it meant to the people who first started telling the tales about it. Well, in the Aboriginal culture, water is the original shapeshifter, and there's even a certain kind of logic that someone today could see. A billabong doesn't maintain the same shape from sunrise to sunset. The water's shape changes infinitely, rapidly, but smoothly. I'm reminded here of Bruce Lee saying something about putting water in a teacup and it becoming the teacup. Because of these facts, at least to them, That meant that water wasn't seen as just a resource. Whereas most societies saw water as a kind of safe haven, kind of a there's water so I'm safe mentality, the Aboriginal people viewed it as a threshold. It was a clearly marked boundary between the knowable and the unknowable. Ripples and lights distort everything below the surface of the water. How can you ever understand a thing that is constantly, infinitely changing its shape? How can you not have just a little bit of fear of something that you could never fully wrap your own mind around? So, the water was something to fear, as much as you respected it. Riverbanks were threshold. Billabongs were doorways. Portals. Any storyteller worth their salt will tell you that such doorways always have their guardians. Some seen, some unseen. Especially with an element such as water, which refuses to be taken lightly. The Bunyip is a reminder to respect nature. Respect the waters. Respect that boundary between the known and the unknown. It's a spirit, an idea, the will of the very waters it is said to guard. If water is the abyss that we stare into, then the Bunyip is the thing within the abyss that stares back. The Bunyip is also what Australians call a dreaming spirit, and yes, the D is capitalized. Now, this doesn't mean that the spirit itself has anything to do with dreams per se. The dreaming is both an inexplicably complex and an elegantly simple concept. The dreaming is actually a living, breathing type of cosmology, where laws, land, and creation all overlap. It's kind of like the dreaming is part of the thread that braids our entire reality together. Things both seen and unseen exist there, side by side, even if they are unaware or only partially aware of each other. Past, present, and future all play out in one place at the same time. Rather than the dreaming seeing time as a linear string moving past to future in a straight line, take that string and wad it into a little ball, and different parts of it touching other parts, time touching other streams of time. And this is where the Bunyip fits so serenely into that wonderfully chaotic system. Since the dreaming is basically the collective plane of reality, and all things are part of it, this naturally applies to water. And we've established that the Bunyip itself isn't just a creature that skulks about in the water, it is a being that is of the water. The way that water is seen as a kind of sage source of wisdom, it would probably not be a stretch to think of the Bunyip as a kind of guardian of that ancient and timeless wisdom. Since water is ever in flux, constantly in motion, that would mean that these boundaries can get very thin in places at certain times. And places like these, if you don't show them the proper respect, well, you don't get the luxury of leaving. So, the dreaming isn't some intangible supernatural realm or dream space, it's a kind of universal logic that makes everything around us make sense. It's not a scary campfire story. It's the acknowledgement that certain places are sacred. Water would be especially sacred, as it is the source for life as we know it. The water must always be in that state of perpetual flux that I mentioned earlier. Once the water's constant currents stop, the water stagnates, becomes bitter. The last time the water currents of our world came to a standstill, there was an event that occurred as a result that is known as the Great Dying, when over 90% of all life on Earth perished. So, with such overwhelming proof that water is so incredibly vital to our existence, and the existence of all life, it definitely sits at the top of Sacred Things and Places Mountain. So, of course, nature would take great care to keep the water moving, keep life chugging along with the current. In short, the water would have its own patron guardian, and that guardian would be the Bunyip. Legend 3, the Muldjewangk, the Murray River's cantankerous guardian. If the Yowie is intimidating and the Bunyip unsettling, then the Muldjewangk is downright terrifying. This highly aggressive cryptid jumps right out of the lore of the Ngarrindjeri people, and they really don't leave much to interpretation when they talk about the creature. They know the Murray River and the surrounding area better than anyone, and are very direct when they talk about the Muldjewangk. If the Bunyip is the guardian, then the MJW, as I will refer to it from here on because that name is a nightmare to even try to pronounce mentally, and I know Raven's probably weighing the pros and cons of just writing his own scripts from here on. It's Muldjewangk. It was one Google search, Tom. I'm disappointed in you. Anyways, they're the squad of enforcers that jealously guard the sacred waters of the Murray River from those who don't show the river the proper respect. I suppose you could call the Muldjewangk another shapeshifter of sorts, as again we have multiple descriptions of just what the creature looks like, and each new description is somehow more unsettling than the last one. Some people say the MJWs are plant-like beings and describe limbs of tangled reeds and bark that rise from the water, as if someone had just personally offended a submerged tree. Other accounts speak of massive shadows beneath the water's surface, shapes so large that the human brain can only process what it sees as nope. And still others talk about eyes, just eyes, sitting low in the bulrushes, massive, unblinking, and just a little judgmental. Though I am compelled to tell you that it's not the various unsettling appearances given to the MJWs that seem to be the most disturbing thing about them. Far from it. The thing about MJWs that really seem to leave an impression on the people that encounter them is the attitude. And now I can feel you all leaning in just a little bit because you know we're about to get to the good stuff. I mean, first of all, when we're talking about a land whose most famous nuisance creature, the kangaroo, can knock out a professional heavyweight boxer and never stop eating its snack with its other hand, we're forced to ask just what about this creature makes it so memorable? That answer, my friends, is in that attitude that I mentioned. The MJWs are like a squad of Joe Pescis, but more like a squad of Joe Pescis that are always living out the day where they got fired, found out their wife had just left them for their brothers, and realized their cat is never coming home. And they take this forever day out on every single vessel that dares to disturb the waters of the Murray River. Dinghies, canoes, fishing boats, anything that hits their water with even the faintest whispered noise of arrogance becomes the targets of their collective ire. All along the river, stories of boats being rammed from below with enough force to knock people off balance. Other stories say that something grabbed the bottom of the boat and then oh so gently pulled it off towards the reeds, as if the river itself had quietly decided, no, you're done. Though perhaps the most unnerving stories tell of boats that just capsized. No wind, no swelling wake, just like someone spinning the rotisserie and the boat just happened to be on the kebab. Now, if these nautical enforcers were offended enough by a canoe to set upon one like a pack of aquatic dingoes on the last pack of jerky, then imagine what happened the first time the queen mother of all offenders dared to enter their sacred riverine highway. One of the earliest steamboats to hit the water found out that sometimes water likes to hit back. When the arrogant steam-powered metallic duck began to chug its way up the river, it struck something beneath the water. And, whatever it struck, it took offense, and it hit back. Hard. The river was saying, I see your colonial arrogance, and I don't like it, and I don't like you. I mean, nothing makes a fat statement of what you're about, like slapping a steam engine on a floating plank and sending it smashing along a sacred river spitting noise and smoke in all directions. Truly, it says a lot about the nature of a person. Or creature, I suppose. Passengers were thrown from their feet. Cargo shifted, and the boat itself shuddered like a cage fighter had just landed the mother of all kidney shots on it. When it finally slipped into the berth later and the crew inspected the damage, what they found was a dent that was so large and so deep that, when they heard the official reports cite a log as a culprit, they found it to be the funniest not funny joke ever. Logs don't have that kind of mass. Logs don't have intent, usually. Though, this is Australia. And logs don't follow your ship all through the night like it has unfinished business with you. Now, maybe a log wielded by a angry squad of Joe Pesci's. He really dug in with that joke, didn't he? Anyway, the damage to the boat was literally just an opening salvo in a way. In the days that followed, many of the crew and passengers discovered that sometimes a thing can touch you without touching you, and that rivers and their guardians are the masters at holding grudges. People began to fall ill. Fever, delirium, weakness, and just the most bizarre sense of being unsettled with no explanation as to the cause. Those affected had nightmares that were so vivid that even upon waking, they still felt like they were being watched by huge, unblinking and judgmental eyes in the bulrush. Others, however, said they didn't dream at all, and that may have somehow been even worse. Some of the people said that even long after and far away from the cascading waters of the Murray, that it felt like the river wasn't done reminding them of just what happens when you disturb something older, deeper, and far angrier than yourself. Others, though, never got the chance to talk about what they experienced. Days later, some of them wandered back down to the river and just never came back. The Murray River holds its secrets jealously, and the MJWs can help ensure that those secrets remain underwater, where they were meant to be. Legend 4, the Yara-ma-yah-who, or the red-skinned face-sucking tree gremlin. A random aside from the author, that's Tom. You remember when this script started and things had simple and playful names like Yowie and Bunyip? Yeah, I miss those days. It was like 12 minutes ago. It makes it super easy to understand why they give things abbreviated names like Roos, Blueies, Sharkies, and the other. No matter how terrifying the critter, the Aussie probably has a cute and misleading nickname for it. Just stating facts. Now strap in, because if you think the name of this critter is absurd, then it pales in comparison to the creature it does the mythic heavy lifting of trying to label. And this little fever dream come to life is gifted to us by the lore of the Eastern Aborigines. It is more common in areas with a high density of fig trees, and in a land with spiders the size of regret and reptiles on the scope of not in your wildest dreams, the fact that this little thing stands out should say a lot. And little is accurate. While the Yowie is the towering curiosity of the mountains, and the Bunyip is a timeless guardian of the boundaries, the Yara-ma-yah-who is none of those. The Yara-ma-yah-who is a creature about the size of a small roo, with the attitude of a sober koala with a migraine. It has an inferiority complex, is done with your crap, and is deeply committed to ruining your day, as if you kicked its dog and then launched into song about it. So, you have a 4-foot-tall spite goblin with red skin and the attitude of a much larger individual. Tom then went on to make another comment about Joe Pesci, and I'm not reading it. He was really on one for this script, anyways. Where this critter really shines, so to speak, is in the methodology, or lack thereof, to its hunting. Yes, when it comes to the most basic of survival tasks, procuring food, this creature channels the timeless Aussie spirit of can't be messed dealing with it. While most predators adhere to a certain honor system as old as the cosmos themselves, one where they actually, commit to being what they are, the Yara-ma-yah-who took one look at this timeless system of tracking prey, learning their strengths and weaknesses, and developing the perfect method of luring them into their clutches, and went, nah, that's super labor-intensive, and then went the other direction. Yes, I'm telling you that this little gremlin predator takes the blind squirrel finding a nut approach to its survival ethos. This thing climbs a fig tree, like a precocious toddler that had a little too much nai-nai juice, and plops on a branch. That's it, ladies and gentlemen. Hunting 101. Drunkenly pass out on a fig tree branch. Class dismissed. This thing truly rolls the cosmic dice with its existence because it just waits there, slightly above head height, and trusts that eventually something will happen. And now we go to a little time-lapse visual of said groggy, spiked gremlin dozing in the tree, and along comes some unwary traveler looking for shade. Possibly a spot to empty the tank, or maybe to just sit and brood on their life choices. Not my business, really. But if they are lamenting life choices, that would be bitterly ironic because choosing to sit under this tree was probably the last worst decision they could ever make. Then, the gremlin drops. Not with some kind of long-buried secret grace or finesse. It drops like a discarded backpack and leaves everything else to chance. Maybe it's the drop. Maybe it's the landing. But at some point between rolling lazily off its branch and landing on the hapless victim, the Yara-ma-yah-who remembers that it's in fact a predator and that it likes its violence. There's just a few things that the Yara-ma-yah-who is lacking, aside from dignity, that is. And that's fangs and claws. What it does have, unlike its work ethic, are 10 little plungers of doom. On each of its fingers and each of its toes, this nasty little gremlin has tiny suction cups. And once it lands on its prey, all that laziness, all that can't-be-arsed mentality evaporates. And suddenly the Yara-ma-yah-who is an overly caffeinated child that just discovered Fruit Ninja. Those suction cups stick to everything. Face, arms, chest. Whatever surface you have, that gremlin is stuck to. And then it does what suckers do. It begins to suck your life force out. The spite goblin turns you into a human juice box, and its little sucker fingers and toes act like 10 little intrusive straws. Oh, and speaking of intrusive, once our little tree gremlin has drunk its fill of your life essence, the little glutton decides to take things a step further in an act of escalation asked for by literally nobody. It then swallows you whole. Yes, your nature walk just turned into a full-on vor experience. Have fun being part of that club. And once you're magically tucked away in the critter's stomach like loot in a magical bag of holding, the gremlin does what gremlins always do after unleashing pure menace upon the world. It then takes a nap. Granted, this one may be a bit more earned than the day's previous multitude of naps, but it's not easy being a lazy cryptid Roomba. And just because we're well past the threshold of weird here, we're gonna continue the story because, of course we are. Why stop now, right? As we return to the time-lapse visual, we can see the face-sucking tree gremlin enjoying a well-earned and hard-fought respite. Then, when the creature stirs, it gives a stretch, pats its tummy looking way too proud of itself, and then the unwary prey is regurgitated. They're alive. Well, mostly alive. Well, relatively speaking, they're alive. They're a little bit shorter now. Their skin has just a touch more red tinge to it. And just for the most delightful unasked-for consequence, if you are unfortunate enough to be nabbed by the spiteful Roomba more than once, each time you become a little bit redder. A bit less human. A bit more spiteful and suction cuppy. You see, the true terror of the Yara-ma-yah-who isn't that it feeds on you. It's that the Yara-ma-yah-who assimilates you. It doesn't hunt for food. It stumbles into future coworkers at Spite Goblin Incorporated. Legend 5. The Min Min Lights, or the Mind-Boggling Lights of Queensland. This one is less of a creature than the others, but is no less disturbing and even dangerous. If some of the creatures we've talked about on this particular episode have, let's call it, hypothetical body counts, then the Min Min Lights have a literal body count. Not because of any deliberate act of malice on the part of the lights themselves, but because the curiosity those lights sparked in unwary observers lead them to their own demise. Let's take a moment here and just imagine that we're all in a car and cruising down one of those far-flung outback roads. Then, someone notices a strange little ball of light. Maybe it's white, maybe orange, possibly even yellow. but it's following the car. Not just following, but pacing the car. And then it paces the car for kilometers. It's not threatening, it doesn't attack the car. It feels almost more like personal harassment than any kind of true harmful intent. Instead, the light just follows the car like a tenacious ex that just wants closure. And this is just one of the many kinds of stories that exists about the Min Min lights. This is one of those bizarre phenomena that just so happens to give old Tom here a particularly delicious little treat. Yes, it's simple and it's silly, but for someone that deals in words for a living, it means a lot. That treat, my friend, is an occurrence of absolute honesty in naming. Something I absolutely adore Japanese culture for, as they're not subtle in the way they name things. But the majority of the sightings occur near the town of Minmin, thus the Min Min lights. Simple, elegant, and an absolute Scooby snack for yours truly. The Aborigines of the area treat the lights as one of those things that you absolutely should not engage with, should not follow, and should just keep going on with your day. And it's easy to see how, for some people, that just wouldn't be acceptable. I myself am a very curious person, and it would be hard for me to just let go of this strange phenomenon. Especially if it were pulling all the weird little tricks that these lights will reportedly pull. Pacing cars for hours no matter how fast they go. If you flee, they pursue. If you approach, they retreat. Some people even say that one light will fragment into multiple lights. And just when you thought they couldn't get any more annoying, tell one of your friends about the lights and then watch the lights disappear. Only until you're alone again, and then of course they return. Which is just incredibly, well, rude. Although it makes you wonder about the origin of the term gaslighting. For instance, let's step back to the early 20th century. You see, while the first accounts we have of the Min Min lights come from the lore of the indigenous people, the lights did something incredibly inconvenient for the more skeptically minded colonists that came later. They refused to remain just a creepy campfire story. Drovers, stockmen, surveyors, professional men whose livelihoods depended on them understanding the land, light, and distance, began to steadily report the same recurring phenomena. Ghostly lights that would follow them across the outback for hours. The lights were always too far away to ever be reached, yet too close to just simply ignore them. One of the most often retold accounts comes from a stockman when one night he set off riding on horseback, only to be followed by one of the eerie little lights. When he stopped the horse, the light stopped. If he took off riding again, it once more followed him. It was like the most unsettling bored supervisor ever. After a little while of these games, the horse was over it all and just stopped and refused to go any further. While the man fought with the horse, the light just hung out, observing and just doing whatever the hell it is these lights do. It wasn't until the stockman dismounted and led the horse away at kind of an odd angle that the light seemed satisfied that it had made whatever silent point it had been trying to convey, and it floated on about its business. And these stories have only persisted. As time moved forward and horses gave way to automobiles, the tales just evolved with the times. Lights following people through the countryside, always maintaining distance. If the motorist sped up, so too did the lights. Pull over and the lights stop. Turn the car off and they just sort of stay there. No attack, no threat, just silent observation. It's like the lights just wait for people to do something stupid. And people being people, we all know that, well, sometimes they do. Stories abound about people that took off chasing the lights on foot, or even on horseback, only to realize far too late that the lights had led them far from the roads, landmarks, or water sources. This is one of those fundamental mistakes that the outback is not forgiving of. The wilderness is known to punish short-sighted impulsiveness. People disappear chasing the lights. Sometimes they're found days later, dehydrated, disoriented, but somehow wiser. Other times they're just never seen again. But the more the lights refuse to be explained, the harder humans try to explain them. The most commonly cited is, it's just headlights versus atmospheric phenomena, to which I say, yeah, and hell is just a sauna. It could be headlights, but headlights don't pace you perfectly for hours, and then violate laws of physics if you actually try to approach them. It could be a mirage caused by heat inversion, but mirages don't react to your movement. It could be atmospheric phenomena, but what kind could cause a single orb of light to fracture into multiple orbs like some kind of aerial kaleidoscope, then disappear when acknowledged and only return once you're alone again? And seriously, if anyone has an answer to that, let us know in the comments. Bioluminescent insects or birds get tossed out as a possible source of the lights, and it's a cute theory, until we consider some of the behavior of the lights themselves. Birds don't hover at consistent height, maintain distance, or follow vehicles across open terrain like a news chopper on a low-speed pursuit. The other alleged heavyweight that gets thrown around is ball lightning, which is the most dignified way experts have of saying, we have no clue, mate, but this sounds cool, so... Ball lightning is 4 things. 1, exceedingly rare, 2, short-lived, 3, wildly unpredictable, and 4, violent. And since we have one of the cleverest audiences in the world here, I think we all understand that it's been established that the Min lights are none of those things. Well, argument made for the unpredictable, but that's really starting to split hairs. The Min lights are known to be patient, persistent, controlled, and apathetic leaning into the board. With all that being said, I think the Aborigines were wise to tell people not to engage with the Min lights, because the engagement seems to be where the danger lies. Not from the lights themselves. But the danger comes from our own curiosity, our hubris that the universe owes us some kind of explanation. That is where the Min lights stop being a story and actually become synonymous with danger, regardless of how indirectly. Well, my dear friends, that is another adventure had. Australia is a weird, scary, wild, beautiful, and very wonderful place. I think all the best places on Earth are, though. Those things all give these places their presence, their personality. I think all of us here know that a little bit of fear can be a very good thing, and scary things don't necessarily mean evil. Sometimes it's just misunderstood. That seems very true with Australia. Our brain's biological reaction to something that we don't fully understand is all it is. With this one wrapped up, I throw the ball back to you, Ray. Much love, everyone. Thank you, Tom. It does feel awkward reading your outros whenever you say that, though. But anyways, hopefully you guys all enjoyed this Legends of episode. This was Australia. This is the second Legends of, I believe. First one was Japan. So, very interesting place Australia is, that is for sure. I know I have a number of wonderful fans in Australia, and to all of them I say hello. Hope you're doing well. Oh, to all of you, actually, I say hello and hope you're doing well. And if you are, and you're on the YouTube side, please give the video a like, leave a comment down below, and subscribe to the channel if you're new and liked what you heard and want more content like this. If you're on the Spotify side, or the podcast side, I should say, please do consider giving the podcast a rating, 1 through 5 stars. Be honest with your rating. I always prefer honesty over flattery. And also, if you're on Spotify, because I think Spotify is the only one that has this, leave a comment with your thoughts on the episode and anything else you want to cover. What's the next country we should do a Legends of episode for? I don't really have any. I don't have any personal thoughts for that. So, we did Japan and Australia. Those are the 2 that I really wanted to do. Of course, I'm not going to lie. I am a bit Americentric in my thought pattern. I don't know much about very many other countries. So if you are from a country that has some very rich legends or lore, let us know. We would love to consider it for the next one. All that said, friends, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week. I hope I see you again here very soon. But until then, remember that you are loved, you are valid, you are important, and the world is a better place with you in it. And until next time, much love, and sleep well.